Let's start our webinar. Good afternoon for our attendees from the Middle East and Europe, and good morning for our attendees from the United States of America and Canada. Before I start, let me thank our keynote speakers for accepting the university invitation to be part of this international webinar. A great appreciation for MUBS management for organizing this event, and special gratefulness for everyone who signed in as an audience. It's my pleasure welcoming you all. The outbreak of pandemic COVID-19 all over the world has disturbed the political, the social, the economic, the religious, and financial structure of the whole world. World's topmost economies, such as the US, China, UK, Germany, France, Italy, Japan, and many others, are at the verge of collapse. Besides, stock market around the world have been pounded, and oil prices have fallen off a big cliff. In just a week, 3.3 million Americans applied for unemployment, and a week later, another 6.6 million people started searching for a job. Also, many experts on economic and financial matters have warned about the worsening condition of global economic and financial structure. The pandemic, as we can all see, is challenging governments to implement monetary and fiscal policies that support credit markets and sustain economic activities. In doing so, however, these policies approaches are displaying differences between countries that promote nationalism versus those that argue for coordinated international response, such as Switzerland, such as Russia, and other countries. They are also intensifying policy differences between developed and developing economies and in Europe between northern and southern members of the Eurozone. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimated that government spending and revenue measures to sustain economic activity adopted through mid of April 2020 amounted to $3.3 trillion, and that loans, equity, injections, and guarantees totaled an addition of $4.5 trillion. As a result, the IMF estimates that the increase in borrowing by government globally will rise from 3.7% of global gross domestic product GDP to from 3.7 to 9.9 in 2020. The economic situation remains highly fluid. Uncertainty about the length and depth of the health crisis related economic effects are fueling a perception of risk and volatility in financial markets and corporate decision-making. In addition, uncertainties concerning the global pandemic and the effectiveness of public policies intended to curtail its spread are adding to market volatility. Conclusion: the quickly evolving nature of the COVID-19 crisis creates a number of issues that make it difficult to estimate the full cost of global economic activity. These issues include, but are not limited to, how long the crisis will last. This is a very important question. How many workers worldwide will be affected both temporarily and permanently by losing their jobs? How many countries will be infected, and how much economic activities will be reduced, as we see all over the world? When will the economic effects peak? Are we in the peak, or there is something more coming? So in our webinar with our international speakers and our Dean of Business, we are going to try to answer the following questions. Will the world witness a new Great Depression, similar to the one that took place between 1929 and 1933? How is globalization affected by the pandemic? What new ecosystems are required? How will COVID-19 affect tourism, which is the second most profitable industry worldwide after oil? To start our webinar, we would like to welcome Dr. Daniel Mitchell. Daniel Mitchell is the chairman of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity, a pro-market public policy organization he founded in 2000. His major research interests include tax reform, international tax competition, the economic burden of government spending, and other fiscal policy issues. Having also worked at the Heritage Foundation of Cato Institute, he has decades of experience authoring papers, writing editorials, working with the public policy community, and presenting the free market viewpoint of newspaper, television, and radio media. Dan has spoken to a wide variety of groups in dozens of cities and more than 50 foreign countries. Now they are 51, right? He also serves on the editorial board of the Cayman Financial Review and holds a PhD in economics from George Mason University. Dr. Mitchell, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. Although we're talking about a very unhappy topic, I'm specifically going to focus on a couple of issues. The economic depression or near depression that we're suffering, and then I'm going to talk about the fiscal fallout, the fiscal consequences of the bad economy, and what might be a path out of the troubles that we're going to be facing already. And I personally think it will get worse, not better, at least for the next several months. So when we're looking at these various issues, the economy, frankly, we have no idea how bad it'll be. We don't know whether the unemployment rate in the United States, for instance, has it peaked or will it continue to go up? I personally think it will continue to go up, at least for another month or two. But what worries me even more than how high the unemployment rate goes, what worries me even more than how deep the GDP is falling right now, I'm worried that we're not going to have a V-shaped recovery. In other words, unless there is some very, very quick development of a vaccine, unless there is some surprisingly effective treatment that is developed in the very near future, I think we're going to have a recession that then we recover from very slowly, with the speed of that recovery depending probably on the extent of secondary outbreaks. In other words, as countries, as regions and countries begin to reopen their economies, to what extent is there another outburst of infections? To what extent will people be scared about going back to work? This is a major challenge. And then when you add to that the absence of a V-shaped recovery, I think whatever trend line of growth we get back on, I worry that we'll have a permanent loss of income in the world, in our various countries. And that's going to be a big challenge. And of course, when you look at specific sectors, it can get even worse. Restaurants, airline, tourism, sporting events, basically anything that involves a big crowd, I would be very unhappy if I was an investor in those industries, because I don't see any way that we get back to what we were, say, 6 months ago or 1 year ago. And then when you add to that, our government's following the correct policy, we don't know, because we don't know how long the crisis will last. We don't know how severe it is. We don't know the trade-offs. We don't know when vaccines will be developed, if ever. So all economists, all public policy people, frankly, are just speculating at this point in time, trying to figure out what's happening with this crisis. What I think I'll do here is share a couple of slides to give you an idea of where we're heading with the current situation. Originally, economists were looking at relatively small reductions in gross domestic product in various countries. However, as time has gone on, and we're simply talking about from 1 month to the next, so in a very short period of time, the estimates of economic losses have grown significantly. The most recent thing I just found yesterday, Goldman Sachs projecting a 16% reduction in global GDP. These are really frightening numbers. And so we now have to consider, what does this mean in terms of fiscal policy? Well, here's a chart showing some of that $8 trillion of government intervention that was referenced earlier by different countries. Of course, this chart was not by as a percent of GDP, so I don't think it's terribly helpful. Here's a chart that might give a better example, simply looking at the different revenue and expenditure measures along with indirect interventions. So we're talking very, very significant amounts of money that are being deployed in different countries. This shows what's happening then with deficits and debt. We're talking about an increase in government borrowing that is beyond what we saw back during the Great Recession, the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And I think these numbers that we see on the far right of the screen, this is only where we are right now. I think there's going to be a lot more borrowing, a lot more measures that politicians take simply because they're panicked about what's happening around the world. Now, here's a chart showing numbers from last year of government debt as a share of GDP in various countries. And you can see on the left that some countries like Switzerland, Australia, Sweden had relatively low debt burdens. This is for some of the major OECD nations. But then you look on the right, you see Japan with the highest level of debt, but then you see Italy, Greece, and Portugal. They were already well over 100% of GDP. And some of those countries, Italy especially, are among the hardest hit. And we don't know. It's very hard to estimate what will happen to Italian government debt as a share of GDP, because we still don't know, of course, how deep the economic downturn will be. But in all likelihood, we're talking at least 30 to 40 percentage points of additional debt as a share of GDP. Italy already was in a situation where it basically required the European Central Bank and others to help prop up its the market for its government debt. So you have a very deep economy, a very deep recession, and an already weak economy with now record amounts of debt. One of my fears from this crisis is that we're going to see a repeat of the European fiscal crisis. And can the IMF somehow put enough band-aids on that to stop it? Will the European Central Bank basically be in the position of buying all Italian government debt? That's already creating fissures and controversy inside Europe. And I just frankly worry that we don't have a good outcome. So let me close up by saying what I think will be necessary in terms of fiscal policy to come out of this crisis. Whether the crisis ends in 1 month or 3 months or 6 months, whatever happens, we know that we have lots of additional debt. We know that we have a much, much bigger burden of government spending. We know the private economy has basically been knocked down. To me, if we want to restore growth, that's critically important, because when you restore growth, you're obviously creating more taxable income. The reason we have big deficits today with coronavirus is not just the pre-existing structural deficits that existed, but this very deep recession has reduced taxable income. And of course, you have government spending lots of additional money. I think probably the best approach in terms of fixing the finances for countries is to copy the policies that you have in places like Switzerland and Hong Kong, where you have basically what's called expenditure limits or spending caps. In Switzerland, they have something called a debt brake, which basically means that government can grow year in, year out by 2 to 3% a year, absent an emergency. Now, of course, we're in the emergency right now, but once the emergency ends, how do you put fiscal policy back on a stable basis? How can you begin to repair the damage that's been done to the public fisc by all the emergency measures? And I think the Swiss approach, the approach that you have in Hong Kong, a few other jurisdictions around the world, I think that's the best example, because not only are those places very successful in terms of fiscal policy, but when international organizations like the OECD and the IMF, when they have studied what fiscal rules work best around the world, they've concluded that these expenditure limits or spending caps are far and away the most effective. Balanced budget rules, obviously, they're very difficult to enforce because revenues are very cyclical with the economy. What an expenditure cap or a spending limit does is it says, again, year in, year out, government can grow a certain amount per year. Again, not in emergencies, but during a regular business cycle. And those rules, so long as government isn't going to grow faster than the private economy, slowly but surely, those kinds of rules restore basically fiscal sanity in countries, because we're in such a difficult situation. Obviously, there's a lot to be said about the role of other government policies. I worry about a new round of protectionism in the world, and the United States, of course, has not been helpful in that regard. We have to worry about what's going to happen with monetary policy. Are central banks going to unwind some of the money creation that they've been doing, which I worry is causing a misallocation of capital and sending confused signals to markets about what should happen with saving and investing. But one thing, I'll simply close by re-emphasizing that if we're just looking at all the additional debt that's coming out of this crisis and trying to make sure we don't have another fiscal crisis like we had, say, in Greece, the most important thing is putting the government budget back on a sustainable path where government spending grows a little bit slower than the private economy, so you can slowly but surely reduce the government debt burden and slowly but surely reduce government spending as a share of GDP, because in most countries, I think the burden of the public sector is too large for the ability of the private sector to prosper and to finance that government spending. So let's cross our fingers that we get the coronavirus under control, that the stimulus, that the spending, that the intervention that governments have done will minimize the short-term suffering, and then try to figure out with something like a spending cap, how we can restore government finances. Thank you very much for this chance to contribute.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for this lovely but depressing speech. Actually, when I was reading your graphs, the question that I asked, would we go to something like the Great Depression? It seemed that we might exceed it. Hopefully not. Let me just, before I move to our second speaker, I had someone asking a question and he has to leave early. So just quickly, if I understood the question right, because it's not very clear, but the thing is, can we ever, Dr. Mitchell, go back to the old times, like before December 2019? Do you think with all those numbers that, of course, they're from international trusted organizations, but those, if I would like to say black numbers or pessimistic numbers, can we ever go to before December 2019?
If there's a vaccine or if there's a very successful treatment, that's obviously the most optimistic scenario for a relatively quick bounce back to the global economy. but will tourism go back to where it was? Will airlines recover all their losses? Will national economies recover all the lost economic output? I'm somewhat pessimistic. Obviously, we all hope for that best case scenario. But even if we get that best case scenario, you can't unring a bell. All the trillions of dollars of additional intervention that we've seen, we're still going to have to deal with the fiscal fallout of that. We're still going to have higher debt levels. A country like Italy is still going to be in the fiscal version of an intensive care unit. Will international investors, will they want to take the risk of investing and buying Italian government debt? I think there's going to be a very serious need for countries, for national governments, especially the harshly affected ones that already didn't have any fiscal space because their debt levels were so high. These are things that are going to be permanent challenges for the economy. And if we don't get a vaccine, if we don't find effective treatments, if we have serious secondary outbreaks as economies begin to reopen, then I don't like being pessimistic. I want to be optimistic, but I think because there's so much we don't know right now, I think it's simply prudent to look at some of these more negative scenarios to make sure that we're prepared.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell, for answering this question. Although our Q&A is after, but because this is a guest, Sebastian, I hope Dr. Mitchell has answered your question. Also, I would like, again, since we have a lot of audience who joined, to say good afternoon to our audience from the Middle East and Europe, and good morning for our audience from USA and Canada. I hope you are enjoying this webinar. I'm sure you are. Now let's go to our second speaker, Ms. Desiree Driesenaar. She's a Dutch entrepreneur teaching regenerative practices. She is a European Commission expert. Her views are combining thoughts from the blue economy with definite and purpose economy. After a long career in business, she now combines her skills with her purpose to create a better future for the world. We all hope this, Desiree. Economics for the world. Okay, that's it. Please, the floor is yours, Desiree.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmed. Okay, yes, I'm an external expert for the European Commission, but let me make it clear from the start that my views are my own. I'm a blue economy expert, and I'm also asked in this panel to talk about my work to align the economy and ecology, which is not really happening in our current economic system, but can really happen and is at some points is happening. So I want to show you that. First of all, maybe let me share some sheets from the European Commission from their report in May, beginning of this month, to show what their projections are for the European economy. Let me see how to do this. Okay, yes, and then share my screen. Share my screen. Is the growth map now visible? No, it isn't. Okay.
Yes, it is.
Okay, this growth map shows that the GDP in European countries is projected to be -7% over this year. And in 2021, they project a plus of 6%. So they will have, a little recovery. But they also say that scenarios are very, very uncertain. They don't know what will happen. So all the projections you make are, yeah, uncertain. There's also strong interconnectedness of supply chains. So that also makes it rather difficult. And if you look at the measures that are made by the European Commission, then you see here the economic response. There is a lot of money invested, 3.4 trillion euros. Spending this money is on, of course, economic things, so businesses, assets, technology, infrastructure, and it's really to protect the jobs and the workers. It will go over all sectors, focusing on vital production, food, and tourism. So that's not exactly how let me see how I stop the share. Yeah, this is not exactly what I am trying to say, because this is what the European Union is doing. But as said, I'm invited here to speak about aligning economy and ecology. And first of all, I want to tell you why that is so important, because I really think that the paradigm of unlimited growth has had his history. It cannot hold anymore. It cannot hold because we have seen it in the weeks that the production has stopped. We see blue skies again, we see clear rivers again. And the way we do economy now is not aligned with ecology. So how can we continue this economy of extraction and pollution? So there's two reasons. First of all, as I said, the paradigm of unlimited growth cannot hold. There's a lot of calculations by planetary boundaries, by the Stockholm Resilience Center and the people from the Limits to Growth, where they say, yeah, it's really, we're overshooting our boundaries. And also there's another reason, because ecologists have been warning us for years that pandemics will be coming more often. It's kind of a logical story, because viruses have unique animal hosts, and we destroy the habitats of these hosts. And these animals come closer and closer to humans. And because we destroy the habitats and destroy the biodiversity, the viruses have to go to new hosts, and they will be transmitted to us humans more easily. So also here, there's a big risk if we keep on destroying the ecological world. So what can we do? What can be a new route, an alternative route through a crisis? I want to address 4 points. I want to address jobs and money. I want to address food security, responsible business, and real estate speculation. And if I talk first about jobs and money, by the way, after these 4 points, I will give you some real life examples of European economies that are already doing it. So there are really a lot of projects going on. But if I look at jobs and money, what if instead of putting all this money into businesses, we would give it directly to the workers and really think seriously about a universal basic income? I know a lot of right-wing and left-wing politicians have been calculating and have been experimenting, and it's really, it's overwhelming evidence that it is the most efficient way to pull people out of poverty, by giving them money and not putting any limits to it. Well, of course, a limit to it will be for basic needs. but it will reduce stress really very much, and it will give people better choices. So then the big question comes, can we afford it? And as I say, right and left-wing politicians have been calculating, and at this moment, of course, they have different views on how to do it, but the bottom line is, yes, we can afford it if we do it via negative income tax. And of course, we will not implement it in society as it is. We will implement it in a transitional society. So also there, we will save money. Because if we trust people more, we will need less bureaucracy. We will have less social problems, a decrease in crime, health problems, addictions. It will be much easier to do voluntary work and get a whole voluntary work society going. And also the bottom-up initiatives on transition will really flourish and get a big boost by having the universal basic income implemented. Okay, so what about food security? That's a very important issue. And at this moment, there's a lot of money, a lot of European money going into subsidies for food and for farmers. And a lot of it is put into it, and still it's not having the results that we want to have. Whereas farmers can be a big part of the solution. They can build a really big bridge between the natural world, the natural systems, and our human systems. So why not use the subsidies to subsidize the farmers that go for healthy soil, that go for regenerative farming? There's lots of methods nowadays, from food forestry to agroecology to holistic grazing. There's lots of ways how to unleash the abundance of nature and have serious food production. We can use ecological intensification methods to make the business models of the farmers work and make sure we produce enough food. We can restore ecosystems with it. And when we have healthy soil, it will be much easier to restore healthy water cycles, restore the rivers again, the groundwater. We can make sure that mechanical energy will be minimized, but also will be renewable energy. There can be a lot of innovation unleashed in it. So yes, this bridge, I think the farmers, we should also here trust them. They have a strong connection to nature, and I really trust farmers. They are stuck in a system as well as all of us. And if we change the system, they will be the ones to lead us out of this and really lead us back to natural systems and natural healthy soil. What about responsible business? Will I leave the businesses to fend for themselves? Well, the answer at this moment for me is yes. I think responsible business should have business models that are resilient and that go for, are responsible for their profits, but also are responsible for all of their costs. So that means also their social costs and environmental costs. So we should innovate. And yes, we can really support that in businesses, the innovation to resilient business models, regenerative business models that work with multiple income streams, that work with really getting circular economy going, giving back to nature, using waste as resources, designing the business models in a completely different way, and designing products with local, abundantly available materials. Of course, we can help with laws, and maybe we should think about taxing resources instead of labor and make it possible to create these jobs and to keep these jobs from happening. And then there's one final point, the fourth, speculation, because our current economy has a lot of speculation in it. There's a lot of banking products that are really very complex and very speculative, and money is created with money. There is also a lot of price stability that is only made with speculation, and I just wrote about it. It really makes me very angry when I see that, for example, the airlines are now helped and the money is going to kerosene not being used because just the prices need to be stable, and they promise to buy this kerosene, and so they have to pay for it. Well, this is not a real economy anymore. This is really kind of a bubble blowing economy, and I really think we should go back to the basics. So about speculation, one thing that really can help cities and the built environment is to stop speculation on real estate and on land, because housing prices are rising through the roof. People cannot afford their housing anymore. And I think if we would stop this kind of speculation, we would really help the complete economy get the bubbles out of it. So at this moment, it's kind of monopoly. The one who has the most expensive streets can buy them first. They will win for sure. They will win the game. Well, maybe we should make it a fairer playground and get the others in there as well and give them a chance. So what are the economies that are doing it at this moment? For example, the city of Amsterdam has embraced the donut economy. I don't know if anybody is familiar with the concept by Kate Raworth and the Oxford University, where they calculate the donut, the inside of the donut. I can share a screen again. Let me see. Yes. Do you see this one now? Share. Yes, so this donut means that in the inside of the boundary, there are the global goals. So that means that is the basic needs that we should really get with our economy, create with our economy. And the outside of the donut is the ecological ceiling. And ecological ceiling is calculated with the planetary boundaries by the Stockholm Brazilian Center. And inside the donut is where it's good. So we will really have to see that the economy is on the inside, on the tasty bit. Amsterdam has embraced this model, and they're using it at this moment to have very practical examples, like their housing problems, like the port activities, the seaport activities. And it gives a completely different framework on what you want in a city and what the business and how you want to build your economy within planetary boundaries and make sure that basic needs are met. One other economy that's doing it well is in Spain, and it is the smallest Canary island of El Hierro. El Hierro is a small island. It was really very dependent on tourism, and then it was maybe stopped to exist because it wasn't livable anymore. And about 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, they embraced the blue economy. And they said, okay, we want to really build an economy for our inhabitants. And they started by being self-sufficient on basic needs. So they became self-sufficient on energy, on food, fishing and farming, regenerative fishing. They're regenerating the ocean now with their projects. They are also self-sufficient on fresh water. So they have a very vibrant economy in which synergy is a driver of the businesses. And also here we can learn a very important lessons on how it can be done. So as a conclusion, well, one thing I want to mention about El Hierro in Spain, they made the inhabitants the co-owners of a lot of the businesses. So that means that in the economy, 23.5 million every year stays into the economy instead of going out, just by being self-sufficient. And that also means you have money to spend on new projects, on new developments. So that also makes it a success story. As a conclusion, I want to say, well, the music is changing. So let's not mend a broken record, but let's really see if we can be daring, if we can rethink the paradigm of unlimited growth and make it an aligned way of building an economy aligned with ecology and the human spirit, and create more values than just money. That's my story. Thank you.
Thank you, Desiree. It was a little bit more optimistic presentation than Dan. And let me just say two things from the group chat. We have Sebastian from Germany. He said, like we can see a bright spot in the crisis as you were showing, as you were talking. And one more intervention from Hubert from France. He said the blue economy is based on knowledge economy. And this brings out research and development plus innovation. It makes sense.
True.
It can create a lot of jobs, even if it seems quite difficult to understand under this context.
Yes, well, we're always working on systemic solutions and see things in relationship to each other. And that makes it sometimes seem a little complex. But if you make kind of radical decisions on what you really want, then it's not that complex and you can create it. However, I'm not saying, yes, this is an more optimistic story, but I'm not saying it's not going to be hard. Because we have to get through the storm, and the storm is, well, mighty hard. It really needs a lot of awareness from all of us, from all the people and also all the businesses to make it work and to really, do it. But what I see is if we keep our eyes on the horizon where we really want to be, and that is not in this broken economy, that's only polluting and extracting, but we want to create something better, then, well, we have to get through the storm. It's like Dan said, we have to get through the storm and it's not going to be easy. Why not transition at the same time? That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but I'm saying let's transition.
Actually, yeah, we are in the storm, but the question is, are we in the eye of the storm or we are going towards the eye of the storm? So let us hope and wish for the better. And I would like also to emphasize on, you said being careful, because in Lebanon we are able to lower the number of infected people to 1 per day, but because people were then relaxed and not taking care of themselves, we are witnessing 4 or 5 days with a high increase in infected people, and we are going to go back to stage 1. Thank you for the interesting presentation. With our third speaker, Mr. Thomas Walenta. Thomas Walenta, PMP, PGMP, and PMI Fellow, worked for IBM from 1983 to 2014 in a variety of client projects, programs, and PMOs. He worked in his first project 1974. Wow, that's before I was born. And built his first PMO from 1995. He is a member of PMI since 1992 and of GPM and IPMA since 1995. As a PMI volunteer from 1998, he led the PMI Frankfurt chapter for 8 years and was elected to the PMI board for 2 terms of 3 years each and was a member of the PMI Ethics Review Committee for 6 years. He is a keynote speaker since 2000. Today, he is consulting, teaching, and mentoring. He considers himself a global project economy expert, covering all aspects of a new project management paradigm for people from 5 to 75 across all value delivery frameworks and helping the global society to improve. Welcome, Thomas. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad. And thank you also for inviting me. And you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. For inviting me and bringing together such a diverse panel of experts. I was really amazed to see, you know, these a little bit more pessimistic views from Dan, and then the more positive view from Desiree. And, you know, I hope I can give also some positive ideas here. So actually, thank you for introducing me. So I have prepared some slides for you. And actually, okay. So it's about the human side of the project economy. The human side means, you know, the whole economy, the whole project economy is really about how do we serve society, how do we serve the stakeholders that are within a project, how do we serve the sponsors who want something, how do we serve the team who is delivering projects. And my background is, as you said, project management. I'm in projects since 74, and I was working with PMI for some time. PMI is the Project Management Institute, the world's largest institute for association for project managers, with more than 600,000 members right now. And PMI last year had a birthday, so we were 50 years old. And in this year, we changed our branding, and we also coined the term of project economy. And project economy is what is standing on that slide. It's about strengthening society by enabling organizations on the one side, for-profit, not-for-profit, and empowering people to make ideas a reality. So project management was about making ideas a reality, and we embedded into the whole society by the term project economy. And project economy has these 9 treats, which are nicely laid out on that slide, and the colors. So we brought this to explain what we are doing and what the project economy is doing actually. So starting in the project management world more than 50 years ago, you know, project management was born as we know it today. And we are moving now into a new term because the project management world has extended over the years and it needs a new umbrella to be looked at. So if you look at PMI over the years, PMI developed not only project management standards and certifications, but also looked at program management and portfolio management. Program management meaning we are not only developing one product in a project, but we are developing a whole system of products which deliver benefits. So that's about program management. Portfolio management then is if an organization has a set of projects, 50 projects to do at one time, that's the portfolio, and it has to be managed because you have to decide which resources to get into that, into which project. We also created something that's called Project Management Education Foundation, which is a charity actually, which all the way since 30 years deals with enabling people in school, kids in schools to understand what project management is. And the PMI Education Foundation coined the term project management is a life skill. So everybody needs project management, because project management in the end is something we can use in our lives. We have a problem, we want to have a solution. So how do we come from here to there? That's project management. PMI also in 2006 developed a code of ethics for project management. And actually this code of ethics can be exploited to other areas, because it's a kind of code of ethics how to do things. And I will come back to ethics in one of the next slides, but it's really here to say that PMI was the first one who was. Now we have a lot of code of ethics, but ethics, you know, is something that is really important for leadership. Other thing, we 3 years ago we started an initiative together with other worldwide leading organizations, Boston Consulting Groups, University of Tokyo, and others. And this initiative was called Brightline on the top. And Brightline was created to make sure that the strategy gap, so the gap between a strategy design and the strategy implementation, this gap is closed. So what is that gap? You know, 70% of these implementations of the strategy don't go well. They are really these transformations from planning to implementation, they go havoc. So they cost more, or they are stopped sometime. And during that time, Brightline had this coalition of partners who brought in their knowledge. And Brightline, with that knowledge since 3 years, is also present in presentations in Davos and in other key things. So this was the strategy of PMI, to extend the view of project management and program management we have into the C-suite, into the organizational leaders. And here we are, and we partnered with a professor from Stanford, and we are now brought forward something which is called Transformation Compass. It's a kind of framework how you can succeed in transformations, coming from a strategy design to a strategy implementation. We also last year bought an organization that's called Discipline HR, so we went into that. But that's not all, you know, the world is going also forward in this area of project management. So we certainly are dealing now with artificial intelligence, the digitalization. Agile has been developed not by PMI, but now we jumped on that train. And the code of ethics somehow leads into a leadership development. So Team 2.0, we are talking about that too. And yeah, so PMI started globalization around 2000 by developing a landscape of chapters all over the world. So we have 300 chapters all over the world, and all these chapters are the local implementations of PMI, and bringing together the members, which are all project managers, you know, and helping them to deal with project management, to learn about that, and also to discuss about project management. I want to come back here by globalization. I think where it's going with globalization, we have seen it in economy, we have seen in the world since 30 years or so, but now we see it also in project management. So there is a term called human hive on that slide. I will shortly explain you what it is. And this is maybe an outlook, a positive outlook for the future, one may say. And it's a term coined by the Singularity University. If you want to look back up, you can contact me, or you can also look at the Singularity University websites. They have it in there. So the human hive, what is it? You know, it's, if you look now at the world, we have 4 billion people that are connected through the internet. You know, we have a smartphone, you can WhatsApp, you can TikTok, you can Facebook, you know, you have 4 billion people on the world that are connected now. But in 10 years, it's expected we will be 9 billion people, and all of them will be connected. But this connection will be different from today. You know, today you have your smartphone, you look at it and you type in something, maybe you call. Still, in future, and it will be not the far future, there will be brain-computer interfaces. So you will not need to have a smartphone in your hand to do something, but you will have in your brain some interface that you can communicate with your smartphone and then with the web. Access everywhere. You know, Elon Musk is bringing up his telecommunication satellite here. He's planning up to 20,000 satellites on top of these we have, and his target is to make internet access available on every square meter on the world. So imagine that. So we will be connected, and we will be connected in a very easy way. Common rights and behaviors. So we will probably, if everybody is connected, so what kind of beliefs, what kind of behaviors do we show? Maybe we go back to basic human values like respect, responsibility, fairness, and not so much rely on religious beliefs or other beliefs you might have, economic beliefs. We still will need in this 9 billion, and we still will have different roles, like a hive, a beehive has different roles. So, and these different roles will consist of specialty skills. Maybe AI is connected with that. What also is important, a hive will be more important as a whole than any individual in the hive, which is basically the utilitarianism thinking, that the best thing is to improve the value for the most people, not for only a few. And that will result into the point that the value of the community, of the hive, is stronger and more important than that value of individual freedom, which, well, might not be so cherished by all of them. And this might lead to extreme diversity. In this session now we have about 90 people, but we have quite diverse speakers, as you can see. So this creates a lot of creativity because you see different perspectives, different points, you connect them. And even if you don't like these points in the first point, you will come back to them and they are in your brain. You cannot avoid to think about them. Second point is governance needs to change. So if you have such a hive and everybody talks to everybody, what is the role of nations? What is the role of leaders we see today? So maybe, there will be a change in that. And in the end, what Singularity University very strongly suggests and has a lot of examples of what's happening already today, this leads to democratization and to demonetization. So a lot of products today are available on the web that would have been worth millions, 20 years ago. It started with Google, but you have all the other tools and apps that are basically free and you can use it. Well, they are free because you pay with your individual freedom, with your privacy with that. So that's just I think, a positive outlook for the not so far future, maybe 10, maybe 15 years, but that's basically what in Singularity University the thinking is. Now let's come back to the project economy. And you see on the right-hand side, these are the attributes we give this project economy as PMI. So we will serve society as a whole. We make sure that what we do as operations today, so think about a factory building cars, this will move into projects. This will, because the changes are accelerating, and we need really to see that the work is no longer automatic. If work is automatic, this will be done by robots, by artificial intelligence. But if you need humans in some work, these will be creative works. These will be works that deal with specific problems. So more and more operations of humans will morph into projects. Job roles. Today, I was with IBM 31 years, one employer, that's 5, but I think I had 5 jobs. So the roles will morph into gig jobs, I call it. So these are maybe assignments for 1 to 3 to maybe maximum 5 years, where you have one specific job to do, and you can build on your personal experience and on the network you have, and you can do this job right. So there will probably not anybody who will have a lifetime employment anymore, or even the training he had in university will only prepare you for something, but it will not be the job you are doing. So take my example, I studied mathematics, and guess what, I never worked with mathematics, but it enabled me to stick to points, to solve problems, and to think in a certain way, that I was very useful for my career and my life. Project economy, as I said, today, if you think about project management, okay, that's business, you know, and maybe you talk about people from 19 to 50, 60. No, we will really touch every human, basically. Now, once they can think about the age to develop some habits and in the group. And in schools, we see really amazing results that school kids learn how to work in a team, how to follow a goal, how to structure the whole thing, and how much fun and how much not only fun, but you know it's successful, and you feel that, and you try to do it again. We will also look, and we'll come back to. I will come back to that term, security. So the point of all the project economy, project management is to provide security to the people. What we need now, you know, in a changing world, you need security. You want to be in a safe environment again, and project managers are there to do that. And with that, you know, they are providing resilience. Let me have another slide about resilience here. So I just want to give you something to read. So if you have the Harvard Business Review from 2016, January, you can look at that. There's a nice article by Martin Rees from Boston Consulting Group. And he compared the human skin with business, you know, and he said, okay, the human skin is quite resilient. You can tweak it, it can endure some heat or coldness, and you can pick it, whatever. So he said, okay, what is in human skin, what we can transfer to business use? And he said, okay, 6 things, 6 principles a business or any organization has to fulfill. First 3 is about structure. You have to be modular, autonomous modules that can do something, that are exchangeable, that are replaceable in the way you need it. They are interconnected, so the interfaces between the modules are defined and are known and they are traceable. Redundancy, so if you want to have one function, one idea, well, you better have maybe redundant, mutual backup, mutual checks, and you have heterogeneity. So this is something where you ensure that you have multiple options. You know, we have a company in Germany who is producing ventilators, and they made a big deal of ventilators. But actually, this company was going down before because they have 3 business units. One of them is ventilators, the others are other machines, which are now going down. So they survive very well because they are diverse. Because they have that diverse customer views, but also diverse product views. And if you structure your organization in these 3 principles, and you also establish some behaviors in your culture, you know, you are prudent, mindfulness, you explore, attest, you are open to things, you expect surprises, you don't really try to fancy off from the environment, you are embedded in your environment, so you go in partnerships, you have sensitivity, what others think, you know, you establish trust and reciprocity in the world, and you are adaptable to the changes that are coming. You are sending and feedbacking. Okay, this was project economy and some outlooks, you know, how to become resilient, how to look at the world, the human hive. Now let's look at this story. You know, Yusra Mardini, maybe you heard about that, from Damascus, Syria. She was in Syria a swimming champion, and in 2015, when she was 17 years old, she was with a group together, and the project was to go from Turkey to Lesbos, a refugee, no? 25 kilometers over the open sea, and you know, the Mediterranean can be a little bit bumpy. So they were on a motor dinghy, which was designed for 6, loaded with 19, and you know what happened? The motor stopped. The boat took water. It was sinking, and while they could see the shore of Lesbos already, you know, it was not there. So what Yusra did, she jumped into the sea. She was followed then by 3 others, and they were pulling the boat and keeping it afloat. And they are pulling, and after 3 hours, the motor, the guys in the boat happen to get the motor going again. All were saved. So what she really exhibited there was, she had a vision. We want to save everybody on that boat and want to go to Lesbos. She took action, and she achieved results. And these are the three characteristics of a successful leader. So she is a leader, and she's also a good person because she didn't take it easy to save her own life alone, but she said, okay, I'm responsible for that. I can do it, and I'll take the risk for my own life. Okay, what is an ethical person? What is a good person? And I want to introduce you to another author I'm cherishing, Rushworth Kidder. He passed away 10 years ago or so. But one of his books, Moral Courage, contains his research over years when he went over the world and said, okay, what are the human values that you can find everywhere? Apparently, some beliefs you don't find in Japan, you don't find in the US. In the US, you don't find in Germany. So that's a lot of different views of the world. But there are common values, and he called it human values, that everybody cherishes. And these are the 8 ones, and as it happens, the first 4 ones are in the PMI Code of Ethics I mentioned before. These are the 4 values of responsibility, respect, fairness, and honesty. And then he found, okay, autonomy, individual freedom is another value that is cherished, and community, you want to be part of a group, of a family, you want to be related to others. Compassion, care, love, and you can see that this compassion now grows. In this crisis, people get more helpful, more compassionate about others. And we say these heroes in the hospitals. Yeah, these are the people who have this compassion and also this responsibility value. And in the end, one of the values I'm striving for very much is humility. Not brag around, make sure that you are only part of the group. You are not the best guy in the room, otherwise I wouldn't be in the room. So you can look at this book, very good reading, and this is an example how, these values all are evolutionary. So we have it somehow hardwired in our brains, and fairness is one of them, and even fairness you experience as a bad or good feeling if you observe others. So if somebody is fair to somebody else, you might be touched positively. If you see someone treating someone else unfairly, you might have a lot of anger. And actually, observed unfairness is a main reason for revolutions and for demonstrations and even for terrorism. If people have that feeling that there is some unfairness in the world, so they develop feelings, and these feelings can develop in something else. Some further characteristics of ethical values to think about, So if I have ethical values, if I commit to ethical values, then I voluntarily limit my options. I can do something, but I choose not to do it because I don't think it will support my ethical values. So somehow it's a kind of maturity to be able to limit yourself in your options you can do. It's like the hammer, you can put in a nail with your hammer, but you also can put the hammer on someone's head. What is good, what is bad. And your values will help you to determine between the two. Culture. Culture is now represented, as you know, probably by common behaviors, rights, norms, and beliefs and values. Now, beliefs and values are often considered to be synonymous. They are not. The values are these we just talked about, the human values, which are ingrained in our brains and which bring us to some emotions. So values connect people, because if you go to Japan and you see some fairness, you will be connected with these people. Beliefs rather divide. I'm not saying they are unnecessary. They are very much necessary to define communities, to define a nation or a religion or whatever. But beliefs are more there to distinguish between these groups. You know, why do I belong to Germany and not to France? You know, that is a belief about what we are doing. So beliefs are also built through our transferred experience from our ancestors. You know, if you have a national history and you build on that, like the US does, you know, always looking at the past, at the famous past. So this is really bringing together their beliefs. And we are all part of many communities. Even more, we will part of many communities in the human hive. And all of them have specific cultures, you know. And in the end, how we behave, what beliefs we have, what values we cherish, you know, what rights we follow, this is somehow the centerpiece of all these cultures we are in. And if you are looking at many cultures as you get older, you are a member of many more cultures, maybe, you know, you'll really become a global citizen. So what does it mean to be an ethical person? First, I think if you work on yourself, and you can do that, to behave ethical, then you will go to a team and you are able to build trust with that team. And then you have created a team that is that is synergetic, and you can lead it effectively. Then you will succeed with the team. I'm not saying that you cannot be successful without being ethical, but this is a proven way to behave, to be an ethical person, to build trust with other people. And it's more important now in our virtual environment. You know, if you build a new team and you have them around the world, you only see them through the screen, build trust with them, and then you can lead them. And in the end, you will be successful as a team. So coming back and to close that leadership competencies, I said vision, action, results. There's a book, Leadership 2.0. And so he builds on these three corners. These are the core leadership competencies. There are more, but these are the core. So a leader must deal with strategy, must have a vision, and must have the courage to lead, but also he must be decisive and put that strategy into action and do something, mobilize others, and then let's go there. And in the end, he must also be risk-taking to achieve the results and not do the gold plating and not try to do it 100% correct. Maybe 80% is okay for the benefit of the outcome. So leadership can be seen when you, and I don't read all the slides, you can have the slides. I will put it on slide share. That if you connect with me on LinkedIn, you can also have access to that. From uncertainty to certainty, that's the main thing. If somebody gives you certainty, he is a leader and you will follow him. Everyone is a leader. Thank you very much. Okay. Ahmad, I don't hear you.
Yes, because I was being unmuted by our IT. Now the IT is controlling everything. Thank you for your lovely presentation. I just have certain remarks from our provost, Dr. Nael Alemi. He was saying the concept of the human hive discussed by Mr. Walenta is intriguing, but does it count for the question of identity, culture, national, ethnic, gender, etc.? Identities will not readily give way for a collective identity represented by universal norms, rights, and behaviors, as the recent uptick in nationalistic fervor around the world, Trumpism, had taught us. So what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, my thoughts about it is we are, thanks to Corona, we are in a disruptive stage. So ideas come up and developments come up. And if I look at the development of globalization, you know, today we have so many people who travel the world, who have seen, me including, seen other people. And we consider ourselves to be global citizens already. So we love different cultures. We love being part of different communities. And if you are connected, more and more people will get into that. So you're right. So the idea of individualism, individual freedom will be challenged by that, but probably people will freely give up that if they have another benefit for that. Yes, the old system, and you mentioned Trump and others, you know, is going to fight it, or is already fighting it, you know. But that's a development we are in. I'm not saying it's a vision that will be 100% there, but I think this is, as I said, it's one potential future. And if we all understand what it will be, you know, maybe that's the best future for the most of us. That's what I said. Feudalism is one of the basic thinking there, which is not the thinking of the dictators in our world.
Okay, one final remark about quickly, if you can answer it quickly, because we are short in time. From Dr. Mazen Khattabi asks you, he says, thank you, Mr. Thomas, intriguing information. How does it tie with the issue of post-COVID IPE scene?
What does IPE mean?
I'm just, let's say post-COVID-19 scene. Let's.
Okay. Well,
but quickly, please.
Yeah, if we have different imaginary futures, you know, this post-COVID scene will really speed up these developments and these ideas. And we have seen it by the discussion from Desiree. We thought about it and maybe, you know, putting ecology, economy together, but now is a time where we will have more drive to do that and more people are involved in that. I think really it is an accelerator. COVID-19 is an accelerator of big change.
Thank you. We'll come later if you have any more questions. Now, let's move to our speaker, Dr. Hayley Stainton. She is a tourism researcher and academic based in the United Kingdom. Specialism include TEFL tourism, tourism sustainability, digital marketing, ethnography, and aviation. Hayley has been teaching for more than 10 years and now shares her knowledge via her website, www.tourismteacher.com. Dr. Hayley, the floor is all yours. The online floor is all yours.
Hello, thank you very much. I'll just get my presentation up for you here. Bear with me a moment, I'm just trying to share my screen with you. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see you. Yes,
can you see the presentation?
You can see the presentation.
Okay, perfect. Sorry.
Your screen is, yes, your screen is shared.
Okay, there we go. So today I'm going to talk about the economic impacts of COVID-19 on the tourism industry. I've been working and teaching and researching tourism for quite some years now. So I'll just talk a little bit about that with you. So I'll go over the importance of tourism, obviously what impacts that is currently having and predicted to continue to have on the tourism industry. And then I'll just introduce you to the shut-in economy, the concept of virtual tourism, the staycation, and then we'll talk a little bit about the future and whether we can reflect and maybe change some of our practices in response to obviously the current pandemic situation we have. So just to begin, I'll give you an idea of the importance of the tourism industry. So the tourism industry currently accounts for 10% of global GDP. So it really is significant in terms of the economic value around the world. It's always quite difficult actually to measure the tourism industry because there's so much indirect employment and indirect other industries that are related to tourism. So many actually estimate that the figures are much bigger than that if we include those as well. The tourism industry represents 5% of world GDP, so obviously it employs a lot of people. It contributes to 67% of total employment. International tourism ranks 4th after fuels, chemicals, automobile products in global exports. The tourism industry is valued at $1 trillion a year. So obviously it's worth lots and lots of money. It accounts for 30% of the world's exports of commercial services, and tourism accounts for 6% of total exports. 1.4 billion international tourists were recorded in 2018, and those are figures from the United Nations World Tourism Organization. And in over 150 countries, tourism is one of the 5 top export earners. So we do actually have a lot of countries around the world that are really, really dependent on tourism. It's the main source of foreign exchange for 1/3 of developing countries and 1/2 of less economically developed countries as well. So putting that into the context of our discussions today about COVID-19, I think it's indisputable that the travel and tourism industry is hugely impacted by this. And I've seen many people say, oh, it's one of the worst industries. Actually, most people would agree that it is the worst affected industry. And that's having devastating consequences around the world. So move that out the way there. So international tourism is down 22% in the first quarter of this year. And they have predicted, the United Nations and the World Tourism Organization have predicted that it could decline by 60 to 80% throughout the entire year. So that is a significant decline. And for countries that are heavily dependent on tourism, that is absolutely devastating. 67 million fewer international tourists up to March translates into $80 billion in lost exports. And what this does is this places millions of livelihoods at risk. Many people are losing their jobs, many people are losing their businesses, and it threatens to roll back the progress that we have made over the last few years in advancing towards the Sustainable Development Goals as well. So there are lots and lots of implications of COVID-19 at the moment. Sorry. So here's a infographic I've taken from the World Travel and Tourism Council that I think portrays some of this data quite well. So travel and tourism jobs in 2019 of 330 million jobs. That's 1 in 10 jobs is predicted to be within the travel and tourism industry. And at the moment, as we speak, travel and tourism is you know, on its feet, on its knees, very much so. And there's not much travel and tourism that's taking place anywhere in the world right now. And 1 in 4 of all new jobs were created by travel and tourism over the last 5 years. So it is a huge employment generator. Travel and tourism GDP in 2019 was 10.3% of the global economy, which is $8.9 trillion. And there are predictions that the travel and tourism global economic impact of COVID-19 is going to be 5 times worse than the impact of the 2008 global financial crisis, which results in 2.9% point of global unemployment rate directly from travel and tourism job losses. So you can see in the center here, an unprecedented projected loss for 2020 is 100.8 million job losses, which is down 31%, and $2.7 trillion in, you know, down 30% there as well. So I think this portrays the problems that we have at the moment quite well. And I'll delve into those in a little bit more specific detail. So here's a few more stats for you. This is again from the United Nations World Tourism Organization. So you can see here a comparison between the international tourist arrivals in 2019 and in 2020 for the first quarter. So you can see we are obviously hugely down throughout the world, particularly in Asia and the Pacific, but that would be a natural consequence seen as the outbreak was there initially. And international tourist arrivals in 2020. So the UN have put forward 3 possible scenarios. So here is scenario 1, is the blue one. So this is dependent on the gradual opening of borders. So one of the main issues that we have in terms of resuming travel is that the world is closed. Many countries around the world all have their borders closed. They're not letting people in. And if they do come in, they often have compulsory quarantine in place as well. So you can see here, the most optimistic scenario is if countries start to ease up on those restrictions in July. You can see the second scenario here is if they start to ease up in September, and the third scenario here is if they don't ease up on that until December. So either which way, tourism isn't looking so great, but obviously it's the pace at which the world starts to open up again is going to have a huge impact on how much the tourism industry can start to recover. When do you expect tourism demand in your destination to recover? So again, this is from some research that the UN have done. And you can see a comparison here of domestic and international travel. So you can see that between May and June, July and September, many destinations are positive about domestic travel. And that is very much a theme and a trend that is recurring at the moment. And I'll talk about that a little bit more shortly. And then destinations are a little bit more optimistic for international travel towards the latter part of this year and towards into 2021. And when do you expect international demand for your destination to start to recover? So here we have it broken down by areas of the world. And you can see here that by May and June, Africa's not very optimistic about that, whereas the Middle East are. By contrast, if we look at the other end of the spectrum, we've got by 2021, and you can see the Americas are least optimistic, and they seem to think that travel won't be resumed until 2021 more than the other parts of the world. So we'll see how that rings true over the coming months. One of the major issues is that we are now experiencing something called the shut-in economy. So because of the large-scale quarantines and lockdowns around the world, lots and lots of people are now staying at home. So the shut-in economy is an economic model that's based on the principles of home-based consumerism. So we're eating in, we're watching TV shows at home, we're taking part in conference calls like today. Social media is very much a foundation for our ability to socialize with our friends and our family. And whilst these are all things that have been around in society for some time, it's now been forced upon us during periods of lockdown. The shut-in economy isn't going anywhere, but it wouldn't usually be operational to this scale, of course. And the shut-in economy and the tourism industry are not really very compatible. When we go on holiday, we want to go out to restaurants, to bars. We want to watch entertainments. We want to go to see a show. We want to go to a theme park, go and visit a national park, go to a museum, whatever. All of these things involve going out. They're not about staying home and being shut in. So all the time that we have such a strong and such a prevalent shut-in economy, we're going to have a problem with the revitalization of tourism. And I thought this was quite an interesting statistic that I came across the other day. And it demonstrates that Zoom actually has a higher market share at the moment than our 5 biggest airlines in the world. So that just demonstrates how much the airlines have receded right now, and how much obviously the programs and apps, etc., that are related to the shut-in economy are really thriving at the moment. So one of the answers, perhaps, or one of the ways that we can help to improve the situation is through the introduction of virtual tourism. So lots of tourism organisations have gone down the road of trying to create virtual experiences. And because many people are yearning to travel, they're yearning for exotic shores, they're very bored of staying home, they need some freedom. A lot of people are seeking virtual tourism experiences as the second best, the next best option, really. So virtual tourism is essentially the use of technology to artificially enhance or create a tourism experience. And lots of destination management organisations and marketing organisations can use this time to promote their destinations for future travel. So lots of people may be tuning in to watch or experience things live, and then when they can actually go there physically, they will do so in the future. So it's a really good opportunity for tourism organisations to start to get ahead of themselves and to use it as a marketing tool. You also have lots of tourism providers that are now attempting to diversify their services and products. So they're actually trying to offer things that can be experienced interactively. So here's perhaps my favourite example. This is a Safari Live experience. So you can tune in, and you can do it via the internet or the television, and it enables you to go out on a real life safari from the comfort of your computer or your television. So this is one type of virtual tourism where you're not just watching a video, you're actually in real time spotting the animals and whatever. And that's one example of virtual tourism that has popped up recently, and there are lots and lots of them. Here's another example. This is a screenshot, so it's not live right now. But this is the Georgia Aquarium. They have been closed because of lockdown restrictions, but they've actually been offering live screening of their aquarium. So you can tune in online and you can see the live footage of the aquarium and obviously the sea life inside. So whilst these experiences are never going to be the same as a real tourism experience, stakeholders in the industry are trying to diversify their products, and they're trying to adapt to the current situation that we're in, and to try and provide some kind of service and some kind of tourism facilities. So that brings me on to the staycation. So 2020 has been heralded as the year of the staycation. So by staycation, we mean staying at home. Whether that be in your hometown, whether that be in your home country, a staycation generally means not traveling too far away from home. Many people around the world are currently, and are set to perhaps for some time, be restricted to staying within their own countries. That might be because there are no flights to leave. That might be because there are restrictions on entering and leaving. That might be because of quarantine procedures so that people feel that they can't leave and come back. Or it might be out of fear that people don't want to travel any further. So China has already seen domestic tourism begin to grow. This last weekend was their Chinese May bank holiday, and they saw a big increase in their tourism numbers from the Easter of the Qingming festival, which was around about our Easter time, which was only a few weeks ago. So they've actually seen a big jump in tourism. Within China, you're generally still not allowed to travel across provinces, and if you do, there's quarantine procedures in place. So this tourism was very much a stay-at-home type of tourism. It was very much a staycation, but there was a lot more tourism activity. So that can give us some hope, because China are a couple of months ahead of much of the world, because their outbreak started in January. I actually usually live in China, and I was on my holiday for Chinese New Year, and I haven't been back since. So I know exactly when it started. They have been experiencing it for quite some time. And to see that they are coming out of the other side, and that things are opening up, and that their tourism industry is beginning to be operational again, is very hopeful for the rest of the world. But hopefully in a few weeks' time, we can follow suit. And with that, obviously, that starts to yield the income from tourism, and you get the economic benefits of that. The staycation is okay for some destinations. In the USA, for example, there's lots of places where you can travel within the country. You can go on, you know, rural tourism holidays, you can go on a beach break, you can go on a city break, and lots of people already do travel domestically in the USA. Whereas there are many other countries, such as Bali or the Maldives, where actually, or parts of the world, obviously Bali is part of Indonesia, there are many parts of the world that domestic tourism isn't really an option there, and people don't really travel domestically. They rely solely on inbound tourism. So those destinations will especially suffer. So whilst, for example, in China, you can see at the moment a revival in tourism, that is domestic tourism. So that won't apply to all destinations around the world, because not all destinations can survive and thrive on the domestic market. Here's an example of a news article that I've seen out recently. Italy are offering to pay half the price of your flight, your hotel bills, free museum tickets, all in order to entice the tourists back to Italy, because they rely so heavily on tourism. They want the tourists back, so they're trying to give out some extra incentives. So that's positive to see that they do have high hopes for tourism, and that there are perhaps some offers to be had out there. But that all does depend on quarantine facilities and processes. In the UK, for any of you who follow the UK news, our Prime Minister just announced compulsory quarantine will be starting at the end of May. He announced that yesterday or the day before. So that will have a huge impact on how many people are leaving and coming into the UK, for example. So, you know, it is very much a matter of see how everything unfolds and take it day by day. But there is some positivism out there. This was another interesting article that I recently read, and it's talking about Bali. So in Bali, there's obviously a very significant tourism industry, and the island relies very heavily on tourism. But they're really, really struggling right now. Most of the tourists have gone home, very few are still there, and most of the expats have gone home as well, or left the island. So there are many, many people in Bali that are now unemployed because they were involved directly or indirectly with the tourism industry. So Bali's really, really been suffering. But I've seen some wonderful stories about how restaurant owners have actually turned their businesses into soup kitchens, and they're feeding people who usually would be employed by the tourism industry, but they don't have their employment there anymore because the tourism industry has been absolutely decimated there. So whereas in a lot of the world, we've got the comforts of social security, in a lot of developing countries, they don't have that, and they really, really are suffering economically and socially because of this. So there is a really good feel of community spirit there, which is nice to see. So what is the future of the tourism industry? Well, it's predicted that the domestic tourism market's likely to pick up late summer. So for now, we're still experiencing large-scale lockdowns. Whilst they are easing, they're not easing to the extent that we are going to be going on holidays tomorrow. But it's expected, as the summer progresses, that we will start to see an uptick in the domestic tourism market around the world. International travel is not expected to return to significant levels until 2021. That doesn't mean that nobody will be flying, but it means that the levels of operational flights won't be at very high levels for the rest of this year. Sadly, many small businesses are not going to survive. The large airlines, the large hotel chains will probably be okay. They will suffer, but they'll probably be okay. It's the small businesses, the independent businesses, the local businesses. They are the ones that sadly are beginning to go out of business all over the world. And that's very sad. And that will obviously have a ripple effect on other parts of the economy. Many airlines are stating now that they will permanently reduce their fleet size. So initially airlines were just putting people on extended leave or taking precautions to temporarily reduce fleet sizes. But now airlines are saying that it's probably going to be a permanent move. And they are suggesting that many airlines will never recover to the levels that they currently are at. We've also got the issue of competition in the marketplace. as well. So where we have the weaker businesses within the tourism industry, airlines, hotel chains, etc., the weaker ones may well not make it through this time, and they may well fold. That reduces the competition in the marketplace, and then obviously that has potential to put up prices as well. So that's another thing that we need to bear in mind. Organisations are likely to have to invest in rigorous cleaning procedures and processes. And some have suggested that the big name chains will actually do better because of this, because they can build up a good reputation. We're clean, we have thorough cleaning processes. Whereas the smaller hotels that you're not familiar with, a lot of consumers won't necessarily feel confident that they do have those stringent cleaning processes. Social distancing rules are likely to be implemented according to local regulations. So obviously these rules and regs are changing all of the time, but that is something that the wider tourism industry is going to have to take into consideration and work around. And consumer confidence may take many years to return. I know from my experiences in China, as I say, who are a couple of months on from us, many people, when they see foreigners, are still walking the other way. They cross the street because they're not comfortable. There was a recent flight, I was just reading it on Twitter this morning, that went from New York to San Francisco, I believe, and every seat on the flight was full. And a lot of people were really panicking and worrying because they didn't feel confident in the airline, in that it was providing them with a safe experience, because there wasn't that social distancing element. So consumer confidence is a really big thing that the industry is going to have to combat, and they're going to have to make sure that people do feel confident. Otherwise, they're not going to want to take part in tourism at all. So here's a few more things that could possibly be the outcomes of COVID-19. Will we have to give blood before we are allowed to fly? So this is a picture taken from an Emirates flight. This is in Dubai. And Emirates were trialing a flight between Dubai and Tunisia, I believe, where they asked people to provide blood before they took off. And they had it, I think they got the test results in 10 minutes, I believe it was. So, you know, is this the future of tourism? Are we going to have to give our bloods to be able to fly? In South Korea, they are disinfecting passengers as they arrive. Is that the future? Are we going to have, I've read about disinfectant machines that you walk through. Is there going to be something like that? Obviously, all of this costs money. Who's paying for this? Is it the airline? Is it the consumer? Is it the government? Will we need a coronavirus immunity passport? Perhaps we will have to be vaccinated and show our vaccination certificate, a bit like a yellow fever certificate. And perhaps there'll be immunity tests, and we need to have some kind of evidence that we've passed the immunity test. There has been speculation that this could be the future of travel. Will airlines need to redesign their cabins? So there's been lots of speculation about this as well. Should airlines keep the middle seat free? Do they need to redesign their cabins to enforce social distancing? Does social distancing even work on board an aircraft? So there've been lots of discussions about this. If social distancing is enforced on aircraft, it is going to push a lot of airlines who do have tight profit margins out of business. And there are also airlines whose business model, the foundations of their business model is to squeeze in as many people as they can, such as Ryanair. And Ryanair have already said, if they are told that they must keep the middle seat free, they will not fly any longer. So, you know, what is the future of this? If we've got less people on an aircraft, inevitably the prices of flights are going to go up significantly as well, which means there's a potential that we're going to revert back to what we had 30, 40, 50 years ago, where it's mostly the elite and the wealthy who can travel, and it's not for the mass anymore. But now is a time that we could reflect as an industry, and we could reform. We've used and abused our tourism industry for many years. We've destroyed our environment. We've annoyed local people. You know, there's been cultural insensitivities, many things like this. And actually, a lot of tourism organizations, they're not operational right now. So they're taking a step back and they're actually reflecting on their business models and how they operate. And they're saying, well, actually, maybe this is a time to change. This is a perfect opportunity to reflect. You've got the time to think about these things. And I'm sure you've seen in the media reports of cleaner air because we've got less aircraft in the sky, revived ecosystems. I've heard about dolphins coming back to areas where they weren't before, and coral reefs thriving where there's no longer diving happening there, and all sorts of things like this. So that's really demonstrated actually that our environment can improve, and perhaps we need to work slightly differently once we come out the other side of this pandemic. So many organisations are now intending to adjust their operations, and they are planning to be more sustainable. And so this includes things such as limiting tourist numbers, protecting the local wildlife, reducing carbon emissions, trying to be more environmentally friendly, etc. But often profit speaks louder than anything else. And will this actually happen? Will it actually be maintained into the future? Only time will tell, we will see. So, get you back on.
Are you finished?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hayley, for the interesting speech. Now with our closing intervention speech with Dr. Azoure. Dr. Azoure, born in 1969, holds a PhD from the University of Poitiers, Paris, France, in human resource. He is currently the Dean of International School of Business at Modern University for Business and Science. Dr. Azoure is also an active researcher with many published articles. The articles' main topics cover a multitude of business dimensions. He is a lecturer at the Lebanese University. Dr. Azoure, it's your speech now.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, let me thank you doctors, Mrs., colleague, and student for your valuable participation, and especially Dr. Ahmad EL Zein for his dedicating, planning, and leading this international webinar on the economy after the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the end, a major thanks to MUBS and to the Provost, Dr. Nael Alemi, who empower us for hosting and putting a great effort to let this webinar be happen. Before starting, go back in time. Before the Black Swan event of the virus came along, the signs were there for an impending crisis. As the World Bank had noted in December 2019, the world economy has been witnessing a steady build-up of debt over the last decade that could be seen as the fourth wave of debt accumulation in the last 50 years. The three debt waves before the current one had all culminated in a financial crisis across the world. The first wave occurred in the crisis-ridden decade of the 1970s. The second wave of debt accumulation began when interest rates were low in the 1990s, which eventually resulted in the Asian financial crisis in the 1997. And the third wave impacted the developed world as well in 2007 and 2008. The most recent wave of debt accumulation began in 2010 and has witnessed the most rapid, largest increase in debt among the emerging markets and developing economies in the last 5 decades. As of 2018, the global debt stands at an all-time high of 230% of global GDP. The total debt for the developing countries in the same year was almost equal to twice their combined GDP, the highest ever. So, an economic crisis has long been in the making. The question was when, but the sudden shock in global production from the coronavirus has accelerated the timeline for the world. Let's now highlight the following factors after doctors and Mrs. and Mrs. They passed through. Dr. Dan, he confirmed the issue from economic depression and fiscal consequences. Mrs. Desiree, she emphasizes on that we have to restore the ecosystem to work on a renewable energy, to prepare natural healthy soil, and to have a responsible business on a social cost, and to find a resilient business model. Mr. Thomas focused on the project management and economy and the 8 human value and the resilience in the best answers to disruptions. And at the end, Dr. Stainton focused on the impact of COVID-19 on tourism industry and the importance of taking care about this industry and enhancing the virtual tourism as a marketing tool, focusing on the staycation and the domestic tourism to boost economy. So here we are going to highlight the following factors. Extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. And in reference to the international webinar discussions held today, we recommend short and long-term measures, beginning by the tactics. First, the economy cannot begin to recover until critical public health steps are in place. Second, governments need to act swiftly and forcefully to overcome the coronavirus and its economic impact. Third, a lockdown to break transmission of the virus, lasting several weeks at a minimum and then progressively eased. Rapid scale up of testing and tracing capacity to get out of the lockdown phase, girding the health sector for the surge of illness now occurring. Fourth, government need to ensure effective and well-resourced public health measures to prevent infection and contagion, and implement well-targeted policies to support healthcare systems and workers, and protect the incomes of vulnerable social groups and businesses during the virus outbreak. Of course, supportive macroeconomic policies can help to restore confidence and aid the recovery of demand as various outbreaks ease, but cannot offset the immediate disruptions that result from enforced shutdowns and travel restrictions. If downsides risk materialize and growth appears set to be much weaker for an extended period, coordinated multilateral actions to ensure effective health policies, containment and mitigation measures, support low-income economies, and jointly raise fiscal spending would be the most effective means of restoring confidence and supporting incomes. How to implement it? A, to prioritize those who most need the support. B, ban evictions of people who can't pay the rent. Ban foreclosures. Hold off on bankruptcy filings. C, avoid layoffs at any prices. Wherever possible, switch to part-time worker or fewer hours. If company do not have the cash to pay employees, don't pay them, but keep them on the books. Keeping one's job, even if only an illusion of a job, will provide much needed psychological support and signal that we are in this together. Otherwise, we are risking not recession, but complete collapse of civil order. Workers in the restaurant, transport, and hospitality sectors are some of the hardest hit by the need for social distancing. Each day, more are being laid off or put on unpaid leave. These workers need income to support their to feed their families, and governments will need to send them money to keep them afloat. Targeted support from government can be in the form of cash transfers, tax relief, or extended unemployment benefits. Eligibility for unemployment insurance should also be expanded. Its duration and benefits should be increased. Beyond these measures, government need to offer calm reassurance that they will reinvigorate the economy post-crisis. After the crisis, aggressive fiscal stimulus will be imperative. One, the goal should be long-run fiscal stability with a modest-sized government. Two, the best way of achieving that goal is a spending cap similar to the Swiss debt brake. Switzerland is moving in the right direction and the entire world is going in the wrong direction. The obvious lesson to normal people is that countries should copy the Swiss. Three, to guard against future crises, debt should be gradually reduced to create fiscal space. For the tourism industry to reevaluate current practices and implement sustainable tourism where possible. I hope that we can look beyond the trodden path, that we realize we are in transition, and that change will never happen if we stay stuck in the old patterns. We need to align the economy and ecology. So we need to rethink the paradigm of an unlimited growth economy. Lots is being done in this field already. And I hope we can continue this path, thinking in more values than just money. I want to close with a Franklin Roosevelt quote: "We have always held to the hope, the belief, the conviction that is a better life, a better world beyond the horizon." Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Azoure, for the interesting closure. Now, if you allow me, please, let's open the floor for some questions. Who would like, do we have questions?
Hello, everyone. Hope you are all well and staying safe.
Okay, but please, you have to say your name and who are you sending this question? Who are you asking this question for?
Okay, my name is Ghadir Deeb. I'm a MUBS student. I have a question to Dr. Mitchell. From your experience, do you think the Lebanese government will succeed to obtain the IMF support, since a team is set to arrive to Lebanon today?
Lebanon, of course, has the challenge that it was suffering a crisis even before the COVID-19 coronavirus became a global challenge. Lebanon has some very serious problems with subsidies. It has challenges with the rule of law. It has challenges with the regulatory structure. If you look at the data from the Fraser Institute's Economic Freedom of the World, it's basically a roadmap of where Lebanon's public policy needs to be improved. Now, the IMF, I have very mixed feelings. Unfortunately, very often they come into a country and insist on tax increases that go beyond the ability of the private sector to sustain and to prosper with that kind of tax burden. I think that there are certain things that the IMF, for some reason, doesn't embrace that it should embrace. For instance, a currency board, I think, would stabilize the monetary system and create a more stable and durable banking sector, financial sector. Lebanon has major challenges. So I'm a big fan of spending caps, but I think that Lebanon's challenges go well beyond that. They have to figure out how to wean the economy off of some of these subsidies. They have to figure out how to stabilize the financial and monetary system. I certainly hope that there's success, because there's a lot of great promise in Lebanon, but if bad government policy isn't fixed, you have to have a prosperous private sector in order to make everything else possible. And I just worry that domestic politicians haven't appreciated that enough. And I also worry that while the IMF will have some good suggestions on subsidies and regulation, I think that their advice on tax policy is usually far too onerous for a productive, prosperous private economy.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Any other question?
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. I have one more question to Dr. Hayley. Doctor, since lots of airline industries, they have already declared the bankruptcy, such as the Flybe in the UK and the Compass Airline in the US. Actually, as I am a pilot as well, I'm really worried about this industry, as I've read a lot of articles that this industry will not recover before 1 to 2 years minimum, and a lot of procedures and standards is going to be like totally different after this pandemic. What do you think about this?
Well, yes, a lot of people have actually likened it to the September 11th changes that happened after that, because we had completely new security protocols put in place after September 11th. And there have been suggestions that we may have a similar scale transformation now, in that perhaps there'll be health screening will be implemented in airports as well. What we really need is for the world to come together and to decide what's the best approach, because at the moment it's very fragmented, and that's making it very difficult for airlines to know what procedures they should put in place, because every country that they're flying to are saying different things. So what I expect to happen is at some point in the future, once aviation on a larger scale looks a bit more optimistic, that we will have some kind of standard protocols across the aviation industry.
Thank you, Dr. Hayley. I see that Tawfiq, you have a question. You unmuted yourself earlier.
Yes, sorry. Hi, doctor. I would like to ask Dr. Dan. We're facing lots of troubles here in Lebanon, and one big issue is the financial crisis, other than the COVID, of course. So do you think, are we going to face hunger? I mean, people are suffering. There's no cash in hand. Most of the money are kept at banks and no one can have it. There's no access. Supplies, I mean, even production is down. Is there a way to face that? Are we going to face hunger, really?
I don't have enough familiarity with the specific challenges of what I know that banks were putting limits on daily withdrawals, and friends of mine from Lebanon have shared stories about their families back in Lebanon, how they are dealing with very serious challenges. I have to assume that the international community would not allow genuine deprivation and suffering. I have to assume, just because countries in Europe, the United States, elsewhere, if there's some sign that there would be genuine starvation, widespread serious suffering, I have to assume that the international community would step in. So a stopgap measure, emergency measures, almost surely would be available to prevent a really catastrophic outcome. But that's separate from what are the structural reforms that are needed to make sure that Lebanon can recover. And that's why in my presentation, I focused on, we're going to have a lot of debt. We don't know how much debt, but then we have to figure out, once we get out of the crisis, how we can get back to a better economic environment. And if we talk specifically about Lebanon, it's the same thing. Whatever emergency short-term measures have to be taken to alleviate the genuine, really harsh suffering that might otherwise occur, fine, let's take those measures, but then fix the economy going forward. And that's where the answer I gave previously about currency boards to stabilize the financial and banking sector, reforms to wean the economy off of the subsidies, those are the crucial things moving forward.
I have one more question. Do you think the legalization of the marijuana for medical use will support our economy, or does it have bad effects on the community?
A lot of state governments in the United States have legalized marijuana, not because they suddenly have libertarian views on letting people use drugs if they want. They simply look at it as a source of potential tax revenue. And ironically, one of the side effects of that is that they've set the taxes so high that many people, if not most people, are still buying marijuana on the black market. So there's a Laffer curve effect that if you set the tax rate so high on legal marijuana, you'll still have the black market as an option for many consumers. Now, of course, that's recreational marijuana, but even if it's medical marijuana, the same factors are at play. So I have classical liberal libertarian views, so I don't want heavy government restrictions on drug use. I don't think it's in general a good idea for people to go down that road, but I'd rather have legal drugs than illegal drugs, where then you basically empower organized crime. I obviously don't know how much of a problem that is in Lebanon. It's a huge problem in the United States. I think legalization, while there are some bad effects of it, the bad effects of that are probably less than the bad effects of criminalization, especially with regards to the empowering of organized crime.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. Second question.
Hello, Mr. Mitchell.
Hello.
All questions for you then.
What's the impact of coronavirus on the presidential elections in USA?
The polling data consistently shows that Joe Biden is ahead of Donald Trump. However, the polling data in 2016 consistently showed that Hillary Clinton was ahead of Donald Trump. Why is there that anomaly? Is there any reason to believe polling data is more accurate this year than back in 2016? I'm not a political scientist, I'm an economist, so I can't really answer that. I do sometimes look at the political betting markets, because the political betting markets are probably more accurate than the public polling. And those political betting markets show that Donald Trump has about a 50% likelihood of being president after this election, and Joe Biden has about a 42% chance of being president. However, it also shows that there's only an 85% chance of Joe Biden being the Democratic nominee, even though he's the only candidate left in the race. So obviously, some of the political insiders who are betting money in these markets think that because of his age or whatever other reasons, maybe the new scandal with Tara Reid, there are obviously some insiders who think that the Democrats may dump Joe Biden before the convention or at the convention and put in a new candidate, Governor Cuomo of New York, Hillary Clinton. My Democratic friends that I talk to in Washington are worried about whether Biden is the best candidate to go up against Trump in the election. Now, obviously, the economic news from coronavirus is so serious that you would think that would hurt Trump's reelection. But Trump has an excuse. He can point to coronavirus and say it's not my fault. And would anybody else have done any better? And I have no idea how the American people will react to that argument. And obviously, there's a big unknown. Will we have a stronger recovery? Will the unemployment rate fall? We just don't know. I certainly don't know.
Thank you, Dan, for the answer. Any other question?
Hello. If possible, I want to ask a question for Dr. Hayley.
Yes, please, of course, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Farah. I'm a student, I'm a master's student at the Lebanese University of Tourism Management. I wanted to address a question regarding the tourism industry in Lebanon. For example, we have been through a huge crisis and we're still going through it since October, besides the coronavirus in Lebanon. So I wanted to ask about how can we actually take advantage of the country to create something alternative of all the losses that we've been through till today, like a new tourism alternative for what we're going through, or like a domestic tourism, or maybe ecotourism. How can we prepare for it and how can we apply it?
Well, I think there's lots of different options that you can take in terms of the tourism industry. I think the most important thing is to have good tourism planning and to make sure that it's sustainable. So whether you decide to go down the cultural tourism route or the ecotourism route or domestic tourism, whatever you think, you know, as a country, whatever you think might work better for you. The most important thing is to get all the stakeholders together and to take everyone's interests into account so that the industry can be sustainable. Because one of the biggest problems we see is that a lot of countries and a lot of destinations, they jump into it and they don't necessarily plan very well, and then they come across problems down the line. So I think it's hard to sort of suggest a type of tourism that would be best suited to you. You can diversify your products and have lots of types of tourism. But the most important thing is to make sure that there's really good planning that's for the long term there, to make sure that it's a long-term viable industry.
Thank you. I just have one more question, like continue for it. I want to ask, do you think it's possible to start planning and implement this type of activity or a plan in Lebanon after all the things we're going through?
I think that you can always plan. Obviously, implementation needs to be at an appropriate time. If tourists aren't going to take it up, then there's no point offering the product here and now. But you can certainly put the foundations down for it, and you can plan and you can do research and find out what people might be most receptive to. You can start sort of promotion and promoting your destination, because a lot of people, they don't know what Lebanon has to offer. So perhaps investing in some promotional campaigns around the world could be something that could be done. So there's lots of things that you can plan for and look into. And then when the time is right, when the virus is gone, when you've got, you know, a secure environment to be able to provide the tourism, that's when hopefully that, you know, it can come to fruit there.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hayley. We have a question to Mr. Thomas from EVA, and then we will.
Hello, everyone. I'm Eva, a student at MUBS. I would like to ask a question for Mr. Thomas. What options are available for private practices to continue to treat patients during the pandemic?
Can you please repeat the question? I didn't get it.
What options are available for private practices to continue to treat patients during the pandemic?
But to continue, what options are there for a private hospital to continue to treat patients? If that's the question, you know, I'm just reading a good book about epidemics in the Western world, and you know, there are several health strategies that were explored over the time, you know, and it depends basically on your government, what kind of health strategy they deploy on in your country for your health system. And there could be, from these strategies, you know, they go from the one side that you are very open and they treat everybody and you track people, and a little bit like South Korea or Taiwan was doing, you know. And in Germany, for instance, we are not this far. On the other hand side, there are strategies of saying, okay, no, we hide the figures, we cheat on the figures. So we accept that a lot of people will be dying, but we will continue to hold up our government structure in the country. So it very much depends on the country today. Every country follows a little bit of different strategy. As you can see, US, UK, France, Italy, Germany, everybody's self. And I have the hope that in future times, the European Union for Europe will take a stronger lead on that. But they are struggling in the moment because they don't have just don't have the powers to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Sami, please.
Hello, I have a question to Dr. Mitchell. My name is Sami Shakar. I'm a student at the Lebanese University studying economics. I want to ask, what's the effect of COVID-19 on the financial markets? Like, I've seen a significant crash in March, but now, like, there's in the past month, like a recovery for the financial market in the time that the COVID-19 hasn't been done. Even it's increasing. So what's the reason that the market is like probably recovering? And do you think that there will be another crash?
That's a very good question because I'm not sure of what the good answer is. There are basically three things that people are discussing with regards to the stock market recovering better and faster than people thought. One, the future is brighter than we think. I gave a pessimistic presentation earlier. Maybe I'm wrong. Hopefully I am wrong. And maybe the people that are investing money in the stock market, maybe they have a better sense of the future than I have. However, let's now consider the two alternative explanations. There's been a lot of discussion in the United States about the divergence between the so-called real economy and the financial economy. Well, to what extent might that be due to the Federal Reserve? And our central bank, in addition to all the money that our Congress has spent, the central bank has intervened very significantly. I talked in my presentation about the European Central Bank perhaps propping up Italian government debt. Well, maybe our Federal Reserve is propping up the US financial market. And then the third thing, which I sort of put at a lower level of importance, but I think it's still nonetheless worth mentioning, is that the US, for the world's investors, is still seen as a safe haven. In other words, if things really go in the wrong direction, and you're an investor, what's the last asset that you want to put, what's the safest asset, I should say, sort of your last refuge? You're probably going to buy US government securities because if everything else is going downhill, presumably Belgium and Japan and other countries are going to default before the United States does. Now, I don't think the United States is in very good long-run fiscal shape, but perhaps it's true that investors who see the US as a safe haven, maybe they are making the right bet. But I think the key thing, the two more important factors are, to what extent is our central bank, the Federal Reserve, simply propping up financial markets, and to what extent are investors simply more optimistic for good or bad reasons than people like myself?
Okay, thank you, Dr.
Thank you. Do you think that the market will crash in the near future?
Will the market crash? I am not an optimist, as my presentation probably showed, but I would be very reluctant to predict a crash because that assumes that I have knowledge on how much the Fed, the Federal Reserve, will intervene. It assumes that I have knowledge about the future of the economy. Economists, frankly, we're not very good forecasters. We can talk about trade-offs and cost-benefit analysis and incentives and things like that. But in terms of predicting the economy, if we actually knew how to do that, we'd all be rich. And obviously, unfortunately, we're not.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a question from Omar.
Hi, Dr. Mitchell. Do you think countries will join their economic effort to fight COVID-19?
That's another great question, because it gets into, you know, what is the best theory of governance? I tend to be on the side that says we're better off to have a diversity of approaches, because right now, for instance, a lot of people talk about how South Korea has been successful, and it seems like they have. Other people are saying, well, maybe Sweden has the right approach in the long run, because if there's not a vaccine, if there's not a successful treatment, maybe building herd immunity is the best long run approach. We have among the 50 American states, some of them have lifted their lockdowns, others have not. In other words, we're experimenting. And I think experimentation in a situation like this, where there's so much we don't know, I'm glad countries are trying different approaches. I'm glad states are experimenting with how to end lockdowns and how quickly to end them, because if we don't know the right answer, I think experimentation, a diversity of governance approaches is probably going to be better in terms of telling us in both the short and medium and long run what is the best approach. So yeah, it's great, of course, to have international cooperation, sharing evidence, trying to learn about best practices, but you probably won't learn those best practices unless you have a lot of diversity and experimentation among different jurisdictions when it's such an environment where we don't know the right answers.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Mitchell. We have a question from Nasif.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank you all. My name is Nasif Fawaz. I do have a question for Mrs. Desiree. So Mrs. Desiree spoke about the taxation of natural resources, which I'm curious about, like, to which extent we can apply this taxation. And if we are applying it, like, won't it affect business directly? So we would have, like, to kind of increase prices more than we already do, which would, like, kind of be some kind of a loop.
Yes, well, it's of course a completely different system. At this moment, we are taxing products. But if we really look in the future and really see that natural resources are getting scarcer and scarcer, and we don't want to extract so much from the natural world to produce them all, we can also have a lot of business models working on using rest streams, waste streams to be resources, using local abundantly available materials, such as seaweeds and myceliums and nettles and thistles and bamboo, like the real materials that can grow rather fast with healthy soils and will help us restore ecosystems. And these products, these resources, we can have like taxation systems where these resources are less heavily taxed than the ones we use now. So it can really drive innovation a lot. And that's, somebody said to me in the text that blue economy is a lot about innovation and research and development. It's very science-based. That's true. It will really boost a lot of innovation if we really look at materials in a different way and tax them differently. And one thing that's really really also in the creation of job that we might think about in a different system is about labor taxation, because in a lot of countries it's become so very expensive to have human energy produce anything that we have to use, we only use mechanical energy, and we all know that this mechanical energy will not last forever and has a lot of by effects with the CO2. So I don't know. We will have to change the whole system though, and that's something to think about.
Thank you, Desiree. Two final questions. First question.
Can I ask Dr. Hayley another question if possible?
Who's talking?
Nasif.
Nasif. Yes, Nasif and then Chelsea. Yes, please.
My question to Dr. Hayley is, like now for a time for post-COVID, how would it be possible to build like to be able to trust that you are doing the right thing after COVID, like to build this trust with the consumers, like international consumers, to be able to go for like the way we were with the tourism industry as well?
I think that's a very good question, because actually building the trust back up amongst the consumers is just as important as not having the virus there as well, because if people have the fear that it's there, they're not going to want to go. So there are organisations are talking about putting special cleaning policies in place, promoting their stringent cleaning, etc. Some are suggesting perhaps there's vacancies between hotel stays or Airbnbs, for example, that perhaps they have a 2-week vacant period between stays. And then obviously there's airlines that are really struggling to comfort the consumer. So this is really something that the industry does need to balance and to work on. I don't think there's really an answer at this moment in time and as to exactly how they can do that. Hopefully, like I mentioned before, that the aviation community certainly can come together and can put some kind of standardized rules and regulations in place, so that then the passengers know what to expect, and they can come to live with the new normal, as people keep calling it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Hayley. Chelsea, you had a question?
Yes, please. Hello, I'm Chelsea Ajib, MUBS student. I have a question to Dr. Desiree, please. So, which sectors are more affected by the coronavirus economically in the developing country?
I think the developing countries will have a really big challenge. And I see it myself. I work a lot in Indonesia and in Kenya, and I have friends there. And at this moment, food is really, really going to be a big problem. Because, yeah, in our European countries, there's still something in place where the supply chains are still working. And I think in developing countries, it's really much more difficult. But also I think they have a really big problem with their health system, because they won't have such advanced health care to really deal with the difficult situations of health. So also in the slums and everything, there's no social distancing, and people who have jobs and who just have to be on a bus to get to a job, it's really very difficult in developing countries, in very cities where people don't have the possibility of social distancing. So I think what we all need to do is think back to basic needs. And I think basic needs are most important. So that's a health system, that's food, that's fresh water. I saw in Bali, for example, that it is difficult if the supply chain of, for example, water bottles you cannot drink the water from the tap there. It's really different. So that will be a huge challenge. And also there, I'd say we should make sure that our systems in the future are more resilient for that, so that we have systems in place to make fresh water, and that for the long run we have restored water cycles, so that we have fresh water to drink. And food security is something as well. Somebody asked about food and about hunger, and I think a lot of countries are already facing hunger. And I think in other countries it will come. I cannot be very positive in that respect, but I also think that we can be more creative if we stop thinking about food in just quantities. And if we think in nutritional value, and for example, also go to ecological intensification, we can use like organic rest streams to make rather easily mushrooms, which can really replace meat. So these things are very important to look at for food security and to look at basic needs.
Thank you. Any final question? Do we have any final question? Okay, Laura, please. The final question goes to Laura.
Yes, hello everyone. Please, I would like to ask Mrs. Desiree about the social costs in corporate social responsibility, if possible.
Yes, of course, corporate social responsibility is a first step for a lot of companies, but for a lot of companies, it stays within, not in the business model. It's just part of, okay, we do business, we have a linear business model where we just produce and we consume and we produce waste, and in the end, everything is waste. And corporate social responsibility is trying to make it a little bit better. It's trying to give us a social face in a company. I think we can do much better if we really incorporate regenerative business models and really incorporate restoring the natural world and also using rest streams, waste streams. We can design business models, you know. We can design, we have designed an economy, we have designed a business model, we have designed everything we do in the human world. So we can design it better as well. And I think that's really what we should do. And then incorporate it in our business models, as lots of companies are already doing, experimenting with, but also making it work. We do have like fully biodegradable bioplastics made of thistles. And thistles you can grow rather easily, abundantly. So all these things can happen, and we should make it happen. We should really think about business models that give back to the natural world and restore resources and use everything available. And we can also look in a local place and say, okay, what is available? How can we create with that? We can be makers, all of us, be creative and be makers and be not consumers, but makers. And then we can be as self-sufficient as possible to make sure we have our own basic needs met. And we are not reliant only on income streams from tourism. I see it in Bali at this moment. I see really wonderful projects coming up where people are helping each other to build this self-sufficient economy where lots of creations are going round, and it can be a vibrant economy as well. Lots of things can be creative, and I think that's what we should do. Is that an answer to your question?
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Desiree. It's really interesting.
Thank you, Laura.
Just quickly, two more quick questions, if you don't mind. I would like to ask. We have from Nasif and Ala. Please, quickly.
Yes, it's Nasif again. I do have a question for Dr. Mitchell. My question is, like, during the World War times, like gunpowder was the most important power, and then it evolved to the economic power. Now, after like this pandemic, can we see a change between like the strongest countries in the world from another point of view, like where maybe the States won't be one of the strongest countries and it would be another developing country that they are conquering like the pandemic?
I guess it depends on what aspect of the globe that we're looking at. If we're talking about just pure power, I think military power is still counts for a lot, and so you're looking at countries like the U.S., China, Russia, the U.K. Of course, when you're looking at that issue, you know, is there any reason for them to fight? If we're looking at economic power, as an economist, I of course am naturally drawn to that aspect of the globe, and I think one thing that maybe the whole coronavirus thing is teaching us is that the competence of government is a form of power. Of course, financial resources are still power. GDP is still a form of economic power. But there's an entire strain of economic analysis dealing with what's called state capacity. Just how competent do governments operate? And one thing people have noticed is that, you know, some of these East Asian economies are handling the coronavirus a lot better than either European economies or the United States. Now, what is it that makes them special? Is it something about culture? Is it something about the fact that they have small public sectors? We don't know. One of the things, well, you know, hopefully there'll be a silver lining to this dark cloud of coronavirus, is that it will teach us and give us new evidence of what type of governing structure is better. I'm a fan of the East Asian economies because I think they tend to have relatively small, efficient public sectors with relatively modest tax burdens that enable the private economy to prosper. So maybe I'm biased in that I think that they're doing a good job. Ultimately, we'll have to wait probably another year before we can really learn the real lessons of what's happening, and to what extent is this issue of state capacity important? To what extent is it important that countries have fiscal space, which basically means that their public finances have been handled responsibly so that when there's a crisis, they have the room to borrow money and investors will trust to buy their bonds. These are things that I think will be important lessons that we'll learn from this unfortunate situation.
Final question, Ala.
To Mr. Mitchell, please. After what happened to Italy, will we see EU again after COVID-19? And how to measure impact of coronavirus outbreak on national economies?
Well, that's a great question. I've actually written a couple of columns about this specific issue. There's a lot of pressure from the Southern European economies. Sometimes they're called Club Med. There's a lot of pressure from those economies to have more internal EU redistribution, whether it's Corona bonds, where Italy can borrow money, in effect using Germany's credit to simplify the issue, whether it's more redistribution operated by Brussels, whether the European Union should have its own tax authority and to use that money for redistribution. There are a lot of fissures and division inside Europe right now. You have countries like Hungary and Poland that are flouting the European Union. Germany's courts just ruled against the European Central Bank, and that's creating another sort of crisis. We've already had Brexit, and some of the richer northern countries in Europe are wondering, you know, we're paying a lot of money and there's pressure to have even more redistribution. So I don't know where it's going to end. I mean, I already said I can't predict politics, and this is a form of politics because countries will have to make decisions. There's a lot of good about the European Union. There's a lot of good in the sense that there's unfettered trade among those countries. However, there's a lot of resistance to the centralization and harmonization and bureaucratization. Different countries have different cultures and different economic models, and somehow imposing from the top, from Brussels, you know, a one size fits all obviously creates political resistance. So I hope that the European Union can survive in in sort of its original form, at least, of a free trade pact based on peaceful interaction among these countries. But there's no question that the European Union faces much bigger challenges now than it did 5 years ago, 15 years ago. And we'll just have to wait and see whether there are more Brexit-type situations. Or, for that matter, would Italy drop out of the EU simply because they can't sustain or endure the types of rules that the European Central Bank or the European Commission would impose upon them in exchange for getting additional aid? Will all the controversies around migration, that of course is another thing that sort of it's under the surface now with coronavirus being so important, but a lot of countries like Italy and Greece resent the fact that they deal with some of the direct cost of migration. All these challenges do make it a very challenging time for the European Union.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you all our keynote speakers for accepting our invitation for a very, very rich speeches, answers for the great webinar. We decided that it would last for maximum 2 hours. We have exceeded 2 hours, 40 minutes. I see that everyone was happy. Thank you, MUBS management, for organizing this webinar. I would like to thank every single audience for attending this webinar. It's a pleasure having you all. Thank you again, and we hope that this storm, as we described it, will pass, and we'll see a brighter future in the near month. Thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you.